Hello and welcome to the Autism, ADHD and Us 3 podcast with me, Jenny Lucas. We'll be talking all things neurodiversity, including late diagnosis, parenting and everything else that comes in between. This podcast is not intended to be diagnostic. I am not a doctor. These are our personal experiences peppered with research and occasionally the experiences of others. The podcast is intended as a supportive guide through the experience of parenting neurodiverse children as a late diagnosed person, hopefully bringing some relatable stories and laughs along the way. Any relevant links will be in the show notes. Let's get into today's episode. Hello everybody and welcome to this episode of Autism, ADHD and Us 3, and I am trialling a new way of recording the podcast this week. I'm actually using the Spotify app on my phone to record, so if you hear any differences in audio quality, then please do let me know at the end of the podcast. There's a little message button I think where you can get in touch, and all my other details are in the show notes as well, depending on what app you are listening to me on. So welcome along, and today's episode has been sparked by something that actually happened in real life this morning that has made me decide that I wanted to talk today about decision paralysis. And for me, and actually my children, how decision paralysis and interoception are linked together in a lot of instances. So today in our household is a school day, and decision paralysis was particularly affecting my youngest daughter in the getting ready for school. Now, it's not the choice of the clothing, because obviously that's either a PE kit or a school uniform, so that decision has been taken away. Sometimes it can be what kind of socks are we going to wear. That can cause a bit of an issue. But today it was around food, and it was fascinating to watch. So I think she might be coming down with something, because that sometimes throws her right off when it comes to existing as a human being and having good executive function. But she just could not decide what it was she wanted to have for breakfast this morning, and she was having literal arguments with herself where she'd say, she asked me to get out some breakfast cereal for her this morning, and I did, so that was fine. I had it on the side, and she was making a packed lunch. She was going to get breakfast afterwards, and then she came into the living room and she was like, no, I can't have that for breakfast. I did want it and now I don't. And then we proceeded to go through a list of things. I've tried and be led by her, because I think she's got a little bit more of a demand avoidant profile. And every time even she would say something, then she'd be like, no, I don't want to eat it. Should I have a bagel? Well, I did want to have a bagel and now I don't want to eat it. Shall I have a wrap? Well, no, I don't want to eat it because I've said it. And so I was going through this process with her where I was like, right, and then she went, I think I've got something. I went, don't say it out loud. Go and take yourself off into the kitchen and see if you want it. And then she went into the kitchen, she came back and she was like, no, I don't want it. And obviously this is all taking time, and it becomes a little bit frustrating when time is an issue, when you want to get out the door, get to work, etc. So I'm actively having to work on regulating myself in this moment as well. But we eventually settled on, I think it was a Nutella wrap. And this was all sort of thrown by the wayside because she wanted to have ham, and my husband had finished the ham, so she couldn't make a decision about what it was that she wanted. But for her, I think that's also tied into her interoception. Now, listening, you may well have a good idea what interoception is, so feel free to fast forward this, but I am going to give a little bit of information about what interoception means and how it shows up in human beings' bodies. So interoception is the process of understanding the signals that your body sends to your brain. So for example, I need a wee. Your bladder sends a signal to your brain saying I'm full and I need emptied. And we interpret that with a particular sensation in our body, usually giving us enough time to adequately find the facilities to do so, or if we're in the middle of something, to ignore it until it's a more appropriate time to go and find a loo. And this process happens with lots of different things that are going inside our bodies. So it could be hunger cues, for example. You get a feeling, a sensation in your body that tells you that you're hungry and that you need to go and find food. It could be that when you're thirsty, you get a feeling in your body and you go, oh, I need to have a drink. I'm going to go and get something to drink. Now, people with a different brain can have issues with interoception. And notice that I've said can have, it's not absolutely definitive. This is not part of the diagnostic criteria. However, it is very common amongst those with autism and ADHD in particular that they can have disruptions with this interoceptive system in our bodies. Interoception can be actually another way of regulating what's going on in the body. So it helps you regulate emotions if you are accurately aware of what it is that's happening inside your body. Little one again said to me yesterday, I think it was, last night when she got out of the shower, and she came through and she said, "Mummy, I can hear my heart, I can feel my heart beating." And I didn't take it too seriously, and I said, "Oh, that's great, that means you're alive." And she looked at me. They're used to these kind of responses from me. But she was obviously aware of her heart beating, whether she felt that and felt that she was anxious, or she felt a bit scared, or she could feel it beating quite hard, or it was racing. That then gives her a cause to worry. And I think for her in particular, not understanding the sensations inside her body, her immediate response is to go to fear. Like, oh, I don't know what that feeling is. That must mean I'm frightened. And I will talk about alexithymia in a separate podcast episode. That's more around not being able to identify emotions and feelings, but we're talking about physical sensation here. So physical sensation is interoception. And so when you are lacking an ability to accurately interpret the signals that your body is giving you, whether you are oversensitive to some of those sensations. So in my own life, I have interstitial cystitis, which is basically an angry bladder. And so anyone that knows me in real life knows that I am in constant search of a toilet, because I am either needing a wee or know that I'm going to need a wee. I have to be really careful about the things that I drink. And that leads me to find a difficult balance between keeping hydrated and not being busting for a wee every 10 minutes. It makes it uncomfortable for me to go on journeys of any kind, long journeys, car journeys. I have to be careful. I can't drink orange juice, like fresh orange, because that really irritates my bladder. It really impacts in my life in a huge way. And when I get that sensation in my body, it's not that I don't get the sensation. I get too much of the sensation that I need to wee, and it's very painful and uncomfortable. And when I am in a situation where I need to wee, I find it very, very difficult to concentrate on anything else, because my body is screaming at me, you need a wee. Even if it's just like a tiny little wee, it's not like a full bladder busting situation. My body is screaming at me, we need a wee, we need a wee, we need a wee. And I can't concentrate on anything else. And my temperament changes, and I become short-tempered, and my patience for the world rapidly diminishes. And if you compare that with, for example, a time when I'm hungry, or if you add it together with a time, for example, when I'm hungry, my husband said that those are the worst combinations. So if he's got a tired, hungry, needing a wee wife, like basically I am a little demon. And I'm not a nice person to be around. So it's really tricky that your interoception, and it can vary, I think, on days to day. It can be, some days are better than others, depending on how tired and stressed you are, like lots of things in life. But for us in our household, it really plays into that decision paralysis issue. I'll mention more about decision paralysis in a bit, but I want to just stick with interoception and how having a poor sense of it, whether that's oversensitive or undersensitive, can really impact on your life. And I think for me, this is one of the biggest things that I'm still learning about as a late discovered ADHD person, is I don't give credit to how much trouble I'm having or is being caused by not understanding the physical sensations within my body. When I was at university and first experienced overwhelming anxiety, and I'm sure that's something that I will talk about more in the future many times, because it had such a huge impact on my life. I didn't know that I had anxiety. I just had these overwhelming physical sensations. So it really impacted me very physically in a way that I didn't even realise there was a mental thing going on. I would wake up extremely nauseous in the morning. It was like having morning sickness. I would wake up and I'd be sick. That would be the only thing that would make me feel better, because it was almost like calming down the nauseous sensation. I felt sick, so therefore if I was sick, that sort of alleviated it a little bit. My heart raced. I couldn't sit still. Like my body would literally tremor from time to, like, at times, and I'd get breathless and I just feel like the whole world was swimming, and just couldn't concentrate on anything. Like I couldn't sit down and read something because I'd have this horrible, like, flighty, butterfly feeling in my tummy the whole time. And it was really, really terrifying, actually. I thought there was all sorts of things wrong with me. And when I went to the doctor, they didn't really know what was going on. They thought I was homesick. They sent me to counselling. The counselling lady's idea of solving the problem was, have you thought about transferring back to university closer than home, bearing in mind that I had been away from home for like 2 weeks. Oh, it's just homesickness. How have you thought about going home? Well, that's not helpful. But it took a long time for anyone to sort of pick up on the fact that this was anxiety. But it occurred to me, even when I found out that it was anxiety, and I still had no idea what that really meant, I found it really overwhelming to figure out how to stop it, because it was like I'm not creating this problem for myself. So I was like, I have been asleep and I wake from my sleep feeling nauseous. Like, it's not like I wake up and then I have the racing thoughts and I allow them to disappear off into the horizon and I run riot with them and then I wind myself up. I was like, I'm literally waking up with all of these physical sensations in my body. How am I causing this with my brain? So that was a real challenge, and actually presented a real challenge for me throughout the rest of my adult life, up until it still does to a certain extent sometimes, but I'm far more versed in recognising it now. But just not having an awareness of what those things meant in my body and how I could control them totally and utterly coloured and influenced every other aspect of my life. I couldn't concentrate on anything else. It was really, really debilitating. On a more subtle note than that, sometimes not understanding or not feeling the build-up of like physical tension in the body will mean that I will get a migraine and not have seen it coming, or not recognise some of the physical symptoms that come with meaning that a migraine is impending. I won't recognise that my body is tense, that I'm thirsty. Hungry's not too bad, but sometimes I go from nothing to that like dropping pit of the stomach sensation where suddenly you just feel sick with hunger, and that's not ideal. And when you're in that position, you're not then best placed to be making good decisions about what to eat. And I think that was one of the positions that my little one found herself in this morning. Was the thing she was expecting to have wasn't there, so there was no ham, and that threw her off into a tiz. And therefore she couldn't figure out what else it was that she wanted, because that thing that she was expecting to be there wasn't there. And then she was in a panic. Not like an external panic. She wasn't literally flapping and panicking. But I think internally then that threw her up in the air. And then as the morning went on, the hungrier she got. And it just became too overwhelming to then make a decision. So we landed up in decision paralysis. So she couldn't feel the proper sensations in her body, or she couldn't interpret what those sensations were. The thing that she was expecting to have wasn't there, and combined those things just threw her into a tiz, and she was not able to then logically sit and go, what does toast feel like? Do I feel like toast? Because everything in her body was then a no, and she couldn't get around it. It's absolutely fascinating. Once you start to sort of get into this world and unravel the different pieces of things, you can see how they all interact with each other. So in a previous couple of episodes, we've obviously talked about executive function or dysfunction, and how different parts, all of your life is controlled by those sort of different parts of your brain, and whether they're functioning well or not, and what can impact them functioning well or not on a daily basis. And this is just another one. If you have difficulty recognising the sensations that are happening in your body, and therefore you struggle to stay hydrated, or you struggle to stay fueled, if you like, with food, or you struggle to understand that actually your brain's been screaming at you that you've been desperate for a wee for the last hour, and now you're in a position where it's an emergency situation where you need to get yourself to the toilet. If you struggle to define what's happening in your body, if you're unwell, and that's another one that I didn't realise that I struggled with, is if I have to go to the doctor and they ask me about pain, or they ask me about discomfort or sensations within my body, I sometimes really struggle to tell them what's going on. Obviously, with my bladder condition, I'm quite well versed in what a bladder infection is like, but I never get pain. That's one of the first things that they ask, does it hurt when you wee? No, that's never been a symptom for me. And I don't know if I would necessarily describe the sensation that I get in my bladder when I'm desperate for a wee as pain, because it doesn't come across in the way that I feel other pain in my body, so I don't associate them as the same thing. It's extremely uncomfortable and it makes me feel like my bladder's going to explode, but would I describe that as pain? Not necessarily. So it can be really difficult in medical settings to try and be taken seriously, because how do you not know what it feels like in your body? How do you not know how much pain you're in? How can you not describe that sensation in your body? And that is something that's really tricky. And I'll talk more about that in another episode because I've got some relevant stuff to share. But you can see when you're in like these positions how it becomes difficult to make decisions about things, i.e. decision paralysis that we're talking about here. And when your executive functioning gets involved, and interoception is part of that executive functioning umbrella, you can see how sometimes we're not operating from an optimum perspective when it comes to interacting with other human beings or making decisions about major life things or little life things. It can all become quite overwhelming. So in our house, we try to be forgiving and we try to give each other space. Now, when I say we, I mostly mean my husband and I, because obviously with an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old, they're not necessarily at the brain functioning space where they can make lots of space and allowances for other people who might be having a more difficult time than they are in that moment. Especially when that other person is your sister and your first instinct is to get irritated or annoyed by whatever it is that they're doing or saying or the way that they're acting. But as parents, we try to remember to take that deep breath before things escalate. So, for example, this morning with my little one, I knew that pressing her on the issue of what she was going to eat was not the one. That wasn't going to help motivate her in any way. I knew and could see that she was already facing some panic and distress about not being able to make a decision. And I knew that giving her a big long list of things to choose from wasn't necessarily going to help with the decision paralysis. So we took it slowly. We went one thing at a time. I let her suggest some things. I suggested some things. And eventually she came back to an idea that she'd had earlier on that she'd initially dismissed. And then she went, okay, I'll give that a go. And I'll try and see how I get on with it. And actually, when it comes to food in particular, again, another topic I could talk about for ages, sometimes with her, it's unconventional. So we will have a ham sandwich for breakfast because who was it that made up the rules to say that ham sandwiches are only for lunch or maybe in a picnic or maybe an occasional tea? What difference does it make? As I always say to the kids, it comes out the same. No matter what you're eating at what time of day, it all comes out the same way. So sometimes she will have a couple of like frub type yogurt things to start her off and to get her appetite going. So then she's like, okay, now I'll maybe have a bit of cereal or a bit of something else or maybe a smoothie or something. As long as she's got something reasonably nutritious in her belly, I'm happy. So that she doesn't get to school and settle in and then all of a sudden at 9:15 the hunger pang drops and her blood sugar drops and then it's just a disaster for her from that point on. We just have to sometimes shift our expectations of what they can cope with. And actually what I've found really helpful, and you'll probably hear me say this a lot across my podcasts, is coming back to that initial, I want a ham sandwich for breakfast, please. Oh, you can't have a ham sandwich for breakfast. And then you go, wait a minute, why can't she have a ham sandwich for breakfast? Where does that little voice in my head come from saying, oh no, she can't have a ham sandwich for breakfast? Because conventionally, a ham sandwich is not a breakfast food. They wouldn't be selling it. Kellogg's do not sell ham sandwiches for breakfast in their cereal boxes. However, does it actually make any difference if she was to have a lasagna for breakfast? Or if she was to have a bowl of Frosties for dinner or some minis or something else? We're sort of just conditioned societally that these are the things to eat at these times, but actually it really doesn't matter. And if she's getting something that's not a packet of crisps or some buttons or a biscuit, to start her day, and I mean, if that's the only thing that you can get into a young person, then you go for it. I'm trying to do the best we can with what we've had. We have to squash those societal judgy voices that we've got, because actually there is no one way in order to get our kids to eat and make decisions about things. But like I say, I'll probably talk about that in a different episode at some point. But what I did also want to mention, so apart from sort of trying to have time and space and grace for whatever it is that's happening in front of us, it's having those conversations with the girls, probably not in the moment, but then later on, to tell them what was going on. Wow, you found it really tough to choose a breakfast this morning. I think that's because you were feeling a bit dysregulated. You were expecting to have ham and it wasn't there, and that threw your decisions. And then all of a sudden, your body didn't know what it wanted to have. And that's okay. Sometimes that happens, and we just have to go with it and accept it and take some time to just try and calm ourselves down to figure out what it is that our body's going to say yes to. And so therefore, we're not creating an atmosphere of shame around it, or an expectation that this is what you should know or should have or should do, because that word should is a tricky one. It's judgmental, and it wants to hold us to account for things that actually aren't real, not real rules. So we do try and have those conversations with the girls as well afterwards to just kind of validate the experience that they're having, or to educate them a little bit so that maybe next time they won't panic immediately when they go, oh my God, I've got to have breakfast and we're leaving in 10 minutes and I haven't had breakfast and now I don't know what I'm going to have. And then mum says when I get to school I'm going to be really hungry. And do you know what I mean? Maybe next time they'll go, do you know what? Actually, I'm feeling like this because the choice that I was expecting to have isn't here, or something else that's happened that's thrown me off the rails today and now I feel dysregulated. I love the fact that both of them can come and say either I'm feeling dysregulated or my body feels funny or something feels funny in my body, and then we can talk about it and we have a conversation starter from that point, and it's not like an immediate blow up. We still have immediate blow ups, we still have meltdowns, I still have meltdowns. I've had 2 this week already, but it's just raising awareness. And for them in particular, it's so important to me that they have this awareness now and that it's growing for them, and that their toolkit is growing about how to deal with these things, or how to try and maybe prevent some of them as we go forward. That is like, it's going to be life-changing for them in ways that they won't even know, but in ways that I will know as an adult who went through life not knowing those things and causing myself lots of damage. The other thing that's helped for me, I've had trouble integrating this with the girls as yet, but I've increased my mindfulness practice, and it's not quite as woo-woo as you might think, although I am pretty woo-woo, not gonna lie, but in terms of like just trying to take moments to realise that I exist in the world and that I'm present. And so sometimes you might see those as suggestions if you're with somebody that's having a panic attack or something, and they'll say like, name 5 things that you can see around you, name 5 things that you can touch, name 3 things that you can smell, name whatever, you know what I mean? There's exercises there where people can sort of become regrounded. I try to use things like that when I'm not panicked. So if I have sort of little moments of, what I call them, little moments of consciousness, where I become aware of the fact that I exist, and talking about it kind of almost throws you into that state. I just try to then be aware of the sensation of the clothes on my skin. Some people might not want to experience that because they feel it dead uncomfortable. I feel the same way about exercise. People say, oh, you need to be really present when you're doing exercise and really feel it. I'd really rather not feel the sensations in my body when I'm exercising. Thank you. It's one of the ways that I get through doing exercises, to blank it out. But when I'm in a calm and regulated state, I do try and focus on a bit of mindfulness and being aware of where I am, what it feels like to be where I am, what's happening round about me, etc. Because I think if you've got oversensitivities when it comes to, what's the word I'm looking for? Just your senses in general, we spend quite a lot of time dissociating and trying not to be aware of these things. So a really gentle, gradual practice of becoming aware of things enough that it's not overwhelming is actually good for sort of stretching that window of tolerance. Now, how the hell I was a music teacher in noisy classrooms for 16 years, and you can imagine my least favourite was when we had percussion out of any kind, obviously. But I mean, I spent many years in classrooms with kids with keyboards without headphones in choirs, rehearsing orchestras and instrumental groups, doing shows. Like, my ears have been getting battered for probably as long as I've been alive. And yet somehow I managed to develop some sort of like tolerance to it, probably just by telling myself that as a music teacher, this is just how it is. But funnily enough, sound sensitivity is one of my worst sensitivities. So I can sit in a room like the one I'm recording in right now, and if I pause for long enough, I will hear the electricity coming from the plug that the printer is plugged into, which is why it remains turned off most of the time. I've got a phone charger near where I am, where when it is plugged in, I can hear the alternate current in the electricity. It pulses. So I don't know. Riddle me how I was ever a secondary school music teacher for a long, long time. Who knows? I don't know how these things work. But but also, alongside the mindfulness, I've really found that having a practice of gratitude, and when I say practice, it sounds like a big thing. I just mean that as often as I remember, I try and name something that I'm grateful for in that moment. So right now, I'm grateful for having the opportunity to record this podcast. I've got the technology to do so. I've got the time and the space to do it. I've got the platform to be able to send it out on. I'm really grateful for all of those things. I'm really, really grateful to you, person right now, who's listening to this and hearing me say these words, because you've taken time out of your life to listen to this podcast. I am immensely grateful for that. I don't even think I can put it into words how astonishing it is to me that people listen to this podcast and that you have come to listen to this podcast, whether you are a long-time listener and you've heard all the previous episodes, by that I mean the 3 that I've done already, or whether you've come at this as the first time that you're hearing anything to do with the podcast. Thank you for being here and listening to my voice. And actually having that little practice of gratitude is really beginning to serve me in some really difficult times, and it's just stretching my bandwidth for what I am able to tolerate. It doesn't mean that things that I find uncomfortable will become something that I'll enjoy doing. I'm never going to enjoy being able to listen to the printer plug making high-pitched noises. I'm not going to enjoy that, but I might be able to tolerate being in the presence of that for longer before it would trip me off and send me into meltdown or things like that. It might, coming out of burnout, sorry, gone off on a bit of a tangent, but in the process of coming out of burnout, and I am feeling better from the burnout that I was in the summer last year, I have more capacity to be around people. I have more capacity to be around my children, my husband. I have more capacity for thinking about the future and planning events and being present in events in a way that it just felt impossible when I was in the middle of the burnout. You know, even having to be emotionally present for my children felt like an impossibility at one time. And so I've stretched the bandwidth, I've stretched my capacity for having an awareness of being present, if you like, and that not being the most irritating thing that I could do with my time. So in our household, decision paralysis and interoception issues can go hand in hand. And I'd say that probably the same is true for a lot of people, and executive dysfunction or functioning in general impacts. I mean, it's one of the main things that impacts on our lives in a way that people that don't have ADHD or autism just don't have to deal with. But what I am finding, and I'm still early days on this, and like I say, I haven't managed to really integrate it much with the girls yet because they're still very sceptical of anything that I want to share with them. Like, I haven't been around the block a few times already. What do parents know? It's hard trying to teach your kids stuff, innit? When they're like, you know nothing, mother. You've literally just started to exist when I did. Which I suppose isn't wrong from the perspective of actually being a parent, with the first one anyway. But just having a practice, if you like, I don't want to use that word, but I can't think of anything else to describe it, of being a bit mindful. I do bits of meditation. I always do guided meditation. I know meditation isn't the thing for everybody, but I do a bit of guided meditation, so there's always somebody talking to me in my meditation. I can't do the whole sit with your legs crossed, eyes closed, quiet, silent room, let your mind go blank thing. I'm not that kind of meditator. But I also enjoy going on long walks with podcasts, funnily enough, or audiobooks or whatever, and just try and be grateful for having the time and the space to do it and be present with whatever it is that I'm listening to. That's how I've done a great amount of my learning about neurodiversity and autism and ADHD in particular, but just taking those times and actually realising that I'm worth it. I am valuable and worth taking the time to look after and nurture like a wee plant. I need feeding and watering, and I need sunlight, and I need care and attention. And with those things, I too shall blossom and grow. And the benefit is not only for me, who will be blossoming and growing, but also for those people around about me whom I can then be present for, because there's more of me to go around, because I've tended to myself and been looked after. And that's my responsibility. It's my responsibility to put those boundaries in place, to understand that I deserve to be cared for, and that is not a selfish luxury. That is a necessity to being a functioning human being, and actually a contributing functioning human being. And I'm contributing to the well-being of children here. Therefore, those children deserve to have a mother who is calm and regulated as much as possible and able to be there for them. And I cannot be that until I've looked after my own needs. So take time for yourself. Try and do little, if it's just like a 5-minute cup of tea while they're in front of a screen. If that's all that you get in a day, take a moment to think, do you know what? And don't be like, oh God, all these parents, 2-parent families, or families that I've got family around about that can just bump them. Don't let your thoughts go rampant with the what I don't haves. Try and focus a little bit more on the what I do haves, what I'm grateful for. I'm trying to live a life this year in particular with what could possibly go right instead of what could possibly go wrong when I'm embarking on something. Yeah, but what could happen for the good? What could the benefits be, rather than, oh my God, but all these things might go wrong? I'm trying a bit of positive psychology and a little bit of, let's go, a little bit of manifesting, go on, to see if I can change things up for myself and my family this year. I'm trying, not always successful, but more so than previously, to have that sort of more positive approach to mindfulness, to gratitude, to just generally existing and being alive. So that is all for today's episode. I know it's probably been dead rambly and all over the place. I'm sorry, that just seems to be my style. That's how my brain works, funnily enough. But I hope you find something useful and interesting in it. And as always, if you're listening on Spotify, there's a little interactive bit. So if you want to leave me any comments or feedback or anything, please do. If you're listening on other platforms, then also feel free to get in touch or leave me any comments. Like I say, any information that I've shared, links and stuff will be in the show notes, so you can click on those. And I would always appreciate a little review, whether that's 1 star because you think it's rubbish, or 5 stars because you think it's great, or somewhere in between. I'd really love you to be able to interact with me and with the podcast and try and keep spreading the news to get it out there. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever it is that you're doing, and I will see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.